Okay, welcome back, and we are now on the second part of our topic on working with the drop down button. Okay, so as you can see, we're now on part 2. So, what's new in our part 2 um, lesson? Okay, so what we're going to do here is what I want you to show now is when the user clicks on any of the items here. So, the items or the contacts that we could see on our list view will be displayed filtered with whatever is the selected group here. Okay. Now, no matter what I'm going to select here, so everybody will be listed. Okay. Then, if ever that I want to display all, so we're going to have an item here also, which is going to show all groups, and we are going to assign that as 0, okay, for the ID. Okay. So the very first thing that I'm going to demo is how are we going to include all groups into our drop down list, because take note, okay, in our database, now in our database, it started with 1. There is no actually 0 items there. So what we're going to do is we are going to manipulate our list. Okay, we are going to specify here by default the very first item. Okay, so I'm going to create here a map with the same column names with our table. So we have the group ID, then we have the value. As I've said, we are going to start with 0, then we're going to have the group name, and I'm going to have all groups. Okay, then so this would be the first item on the list. Okay, and I'm going to start with the selected group ID. I'm going to specify here 0. So how are we going to concatenate then the current value? Because if ever we are going to have on line number 28, we have assigned whatever would be the result from get groups. Okay, so this line here is going to overwrite the initial value of the groups list. So that is why we are going to do here is we are going to concatenate, or we are going to add, actually we are going to append the current value of the groups list with whatever would be the new value to be returned by get groups. So we are going to do here is I'm going to have the groups list, then one way to append is actually just to have the plus operator. Okay, so let us try. I'm going to save, then reload. Okay, so ptok and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Log in. So as you can see, by default, so we have there all groups, and as you can see, all groups also we have nothing is filtered into our list view. So the next thing that we're going to do is when the user is going to select any of these, this should also change. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So take note that we have the contacts list view. We have it here. In our contacts list view, what triggers the rebuild of the list view is actually when we are going to change, or when the value of the length changes. Okay, for the contacts list. Okay, so, and by the way, when we So we are going to modify this one later on. Okay. Another thing is in our get contacts, we are getting actually all. Okay. So supposedly we are going to get only those contacts that belongs to whatever is selected into our drop down button. Okay. So the very first thing that we are going to modify is actually our contacts.php. Okay. So as you can see, the only filter that we have is only the user ID. Okay. By the way, I'm going to return first. SQL is equal to okay. Right. Again, let's go back. The only constraint that we have is whoever would be the user. Okay, but now there will be two constraints: who will be the user and what group. Okay, that will depend. If ever the user selects all groups, it should return all. But if ever the user selects any of the items here, so therefore it should return only those records that corresponds with the selected group. Okay. So going back, so this one here returns all contacts of this user. But again, it should depend on our select statement will depend on the second constraint aside from this one, but who will be in what groups should only be returned. Okay, so that is why we should also return, or we should also send, by the way, going back first here, aside from the user ID, we must have to request, or we must have to send another parameter. Let us just call it group ID, and the group ID will depend on the value of the selected group ID. Okay, so take note, we are now sending two parameters, the user ID and the selected group ID. And if ever it is going to select all, the value of selected group ID will be 0. Why? It is because we have created our first item for the all to be 0. A bit there. Okay. So again, I modified the get contacts, and we are going to send another parameter, group ID, so that here we must have to validate. Okay. First is we are going to validate if JSON, then group ID is equal to 0. If ever it is equal to 0, then we are going to have our SQL statement to be all. Okay. Else, meaning if ever it is not 0, so it could be greater than 0. Okay. So we are going to have another parameter. As I'm just going to copy. I could have here and, okay, and contact group is equal to JSON group ID. No, group ID. This variable here, the parameter. No, I'm going to have a placeholder. Okay. Group ID. Okay. But since we could create actually a ternary version of this if structure here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a ternary one. So I'm going to remove that SQL is equal to if, okay, so if is equal to 0, then we are going to have our select statement, then else okay, so this is better now. Okay, so the if statement that the if structure earlier that I have written here is actually the result would be the same with this one. So we're just going to say if the group ID is equal to 0, then we're just going to return this one here. Only one constraint. But if ever greater than 0, then it is going to return, or it is going to ask or filter for another constraint for the user ID. Okay? So in our bind parameters, by the way, if ever we have only one item, for example, in number, if ever equal to 0, so this would suffice. Okay? But if ever this is satisfied, so therefore we need another one. Okay? So that is why I'm going to have here, and to validate if JSON, then we have the group ID is greater than 0. So meaning we are going to have another parameter. So I'm going to copy that, then add. By this time we're going to have the next placeholder is we have the group ID and group ID. Okay, so here we have now, we are now considering here either one constraint if ever the user is going to select all groups, but there will be two constraints if ever the user selected for a specific group. Okay, and also here we have validated if ever it is greater than 0, meaning the user selected for a specific group. So therefore we are going to supply for the value of the group ID. So that is why we have here a statement for bind parameter for the group ID. Okay, so save. So I'm going to try into our what's this? Our postman. So get contacts. Then for the value of our JSON is we're going to have user ID. So I'm just going to have 1. I think Pitok is 1. Then we're going to have group ID. Oops. Group ID. Okay, first I'm going to have 0. Okay. Then send. Oops. On line 16. Wait. So there's a problem on line number 16. Group ID. group ID. Also in number 10. So the same. By the way, okay, nevertheless, it returned the items. But anyway, we have a group. Oh no, it should be group ID. Send. Okay. So I just changed, by the way, the single quote. So postman, I don't know. Okay. We should use here in our postman, we are going to use double quote. So as you can see, it returned all. Okay. So how about if ever that I'm going to have, let's say family. I think one is family. So send. Okay. So 1, 2, 3 items only. Okay. So going back with 0. So we have a lot. Okay, so our code is correct. So again, the only thing that we have changed is actually the number of constraints. Okay, so if ever all, we are going to validate only for the user ID, but if ever a user is going to select for a group, a specific group, so we're going to add the constraint contact group must be equal to the group ID. Okay, so that's for our PHP. So next is we are going to modify now our this one here. Okay, so what are we going to modify? So, or when are we going to change or update our list view? Get, this is the get contacts list view. Okay. So in our groups drop down button, when we are going to create, by the way, this is actually the return widget for our future builder, and we have stated here that when the user is going to change, okay, or select an item from the list, we are going to assign the new value, or the group ID, actually the new value here will be the new group ID into our selected group ID. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to okay, since going back, wait, okay, so here are get contacts, and we have here our selected group ID. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, take note, on line 131, the selected group ID has been changed. Okay, so that the changes would be reflected, or the number of records will also change, we must have to call get contacts again. Okay, and stating now, for example, the initial value is 0, then we change it to 1, so we must have to call get contacts again, so that this new value of the selected group ID will be sent to our API, and only the records that corresponds to that new value would be returned. Okay, so that is why here I'm going to have the contacts list, okay, is equal to, wait, get contacts. Undefined. Wait. This must be an asynchronous. No, it's not there. Oh, contacts list. Okay. Then our await. So this await here belongs to the unchanged function. To the callback functions we're going to have our asynchronous command into our into this function. Okay. So now, when we have changed the value of or the number of items into our contacts list, so therefore our contacts list view, the length would be changed also. Okay, so that would then triggers for the update or the rebuild of the list view. Okay, so hopefully no more errors. Okay, save. Let's try. Reload. It took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we have by default all groups. Then I'm going to change. For example, I'm going to have family. Click. So as you can see, we have only 3 items. Okay. Then I'm going to have classmates. So only Bongbong. Then all groups. Then we have all. Enemies. We have 1 and so on. Okay. So what we have modified here is actually first is we have added the first item here. Okay, so initially by default, so we have the groups list equal to a list with a single item, okay, or element into this list. Then later on, as we have started, or when the page is loaded, so we have concatenated or we have appended, okay, the current value of the groups list with whatever would be the returned value from the get groups method. Okay, and into our get groups, so we have here now also same, we have no problem, we have not changed anything here. Then when the user is going to select any items into our drop down list, okay, so we are going to update the list view. So we have it here, this one here, because the new value is going to contain the ID of the selected item here. So every time that it is going to change, so therefore we are going to get contacts again, okay, and with our get contacts we have now added the selected group ID, okay, because into or from our API, okay, so we have, it could be 0 meaning all, or if ever not 0 meaning it is possible the user has selected an item from the contacts, no, from the groups list. So we have added another constraint which is equal, the contact group should only be equal to the group ID, and if ever it is greater than 0 meaning the user has selected for a group, so therefore we are going to bind a parameter for the value of the group ID, which is actually coming from this one here. Okay, so that's one of the use cases of this one here. Okay, the drop down button. Okay, so hopefully you have followed thoroughly, and that's all for this video, and I'll see you on the next one.